for decades, first in the form of devastating sanctions, and then in the 2003 invasion launched by George H.W. Bush's son, George W. Bush. Thousands of U.S. troops and contractors remain in Iraq today.
We look back now at a largely forgotten aspect of Bush's war in Iraq, the vast domestic propaganda campaign that occurred in the United States before the invasion began. The story centers on a young Kuwaiti woman named Nayira. On October 10th, 1990, the 15-year-old girl gave riveting testimony before Congress about the horrors inside Kuwait after Iraq invaded.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, my name is Nayira, and I just came out of Kuwait. My sister, with my 5-day-old nephew, traveled across the desert to safety. There was no milk available for the baby in Kuwait. They barely escaped when their car was stuck in the desert sand, and help came from Saudi Arabia. I stayed behind and wanted to do something for my country. The second week after an invasion, I volunteered at the Al-Adan hospital with 12 other women who wanted to help as well. I was the youngest volunteer. The other women were from 20 to 30 years old. While I was there, I saw the Iraqi soldiers come into the hospital with guns. They took the babies out of the incubators, and left the children to die on the cold floor. It was horrifying. I could not help but think of my nephew.
Nayira's testimony was rebroadcast across the country and marked a turning point in public opinion on going to war. President George H.W. Bush repeatedly cited her claims.
They had kids in incubators, and they were thrown out of the incubators so that Kuwait could be systematically dismantled.
3 months after Nayira testified, President George H.W. Bush launched the invasion of Iraq. But it turned out Nayira's claims weren't true. No human rights group or news outlet could confirm what she said. It also turned out Nayira was not just any Kuwaiti teenager. She was the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador to the United States, Saad Nasir al-Sabah. She had been coached by the public relations firm Hill & Knowlton, which was working for the Kuwaiti government. We're joined now by the journalist who first revealed Nayira's identity. Rick MacArthur, the president and publisher of Harper's Magazine, the author of the book Second Front, Censorship and Propaganda in the 1991 Gulf War. I mean, so, you know, as we said, this is a turning point. You have this teenager, this girl saying she witnessed this, that Iraqi soldiers came into Kuwait and ripped babies out of Kuwaiti incubators. But she was only referred to as Nayira at the time of the testimony. It wasn't Nayira al-Sabah, so you would know that she's the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador who also testified in that hearing.
Correct. That's all part of the propaganda plan, is to maintain her anonymity, to protect her and her family against reprisals in Kuwait. That was the cover story. But of course, nobody bothered to try to find out who she really was. They just bought the story hook, line, and sinker, even though at the time there were a couple of human rights investigators who were becoming suspicious. I got onto the trail after the war, unfortunately.
There's been international condemnation of China after the BBC reported claims that women in so-called re-education camps for the Uyghur Muslim minority are being raped and tortured. The British and US governments are now calling on Beijing to allow independent investigators into the camps. China has denied the allegations and accused the BBC of making a false report. Matthew Hill has spoken to several former detainees for his report, and you may find some of their accounts distressing.
Terzanai Zawuddin is reliving a story she can barely bring herself to tell. She was held at one of Xinjiang's so-called re-education camps. These satellite images show the site where Terzanai says she was held, sharing a cell with 13 other women. She's haunted by one image, masked men coming down a camp corridor like this one after midnight.
They were 3 men. Not one, but 3. They did whatever evil their mind could think of, and they didn't spare any part of my body, biting it to the extent that it was disgusting to look at. They didn't just rape, they were barbaric. They had bitten all over my body.
The US have granted her safe refuge after investigating her claims. She's waived her right to anonymity and now feels free to speak out about the full extent of the abuse she says she suffered.
They had an electric baton. I didn't know what it was. It was pushed into my private parts and I was tormented with electric shocks.
It's estimated over 1 million Uyghurs and other Muslims are held in the camps. These never-before-broadcast pictures were filmed secretly in a camp under construction and published by a magazine on religious liberty. Many former camp inmates flee to Istanbul. Some talk of being forced to choose between punishment or complicity in these crimes.
Han Chinese men would pay money to have their pick of the pretty young inmates. My job is to remove their clothes and then handcuff them on their beds so they cannot move.
The testimony of the women we've interviewed has sparked international condemnation. The US State Department said the atrocities they describe shock the conscience. And tonight, President Biden has revealed human rights in China will be a priority for his administration. Here too, in Parliament today, the treatment of the women was condemned by the Foreign Office.
The evidence of the scale and the severity of these violations is now far-reaching. It paints a truly harrowing picture. If China wishes to dispute this evidence, then it must allow unfettered access to the region for the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights or another independent fact-finding body.
China has responded to our investigation, insisting its camps are vocational training centres designed to stop Muslims living in the region from turning to extremism. It accuses the BBC of lies and misinformation.
There is no so-called systemic sexual assault and abuse against women. China is a country ruled by law. Our constitution guarantees and protects human rights, and it is embodied in our legal system and the government's work.
These women have spoken out about rape, which in their culture is an unspoken crime.
We look back now at a largely forgotten aspect of Bush's war in Iraq, the vast domestic propaganda campaign that occurred in the United States before the invasion began. The story centers on a young Kuwaiti woman named Nayira. On October 10, 1990, the 15-year-old girl gave riveting testimony before Congress about the horrors inside Kuwait